Is Issues and Insights, sponsored by Pacific Forum CSIS. And now your host, international business lawyer David Day.
Well, good afternoon. We are going to be talking about the Asia Pacific region's flashpoints. We're going to try to update you on the critical areas, and you're probably asking yourself, well, so what? Why is this important? And for most of you in the audience, you know that North Korea is one of these flashpoints, and the potential for some damage being caused by North Korea is pretty high. But there are a number of other flashpoints that we want to talk with you about this afternoon. And the reason for that is that if we focus on the dynamism, the explosion of business and economies in the Asia Pacific region, and we take that and we juxtapose it with the rebalance, where the United States is shifting its military forces from Europe and the Middle East into our region, it raises a number of questions. And the principal question that we want to be talking about is the potential for instability in this dynamic region. And so it's important that we look at those types of flashpoints that could be a destabilizing influence. And our guest here to assist us with this whole process this afternoon is the Executive Director of Pacific Forum, Brad Glosserman. And Brad, nice to have you back.
Thanks, David. It's good to be here. Although I already want to take issue with one of the things that you just said, and that is that, well, you're absolutely right that we need to be thinking about Asia, because in the context of the rebalance, the refocus, if you will, of American foreign policy attention in the world, away primarily from, say, the Middle East and Central Asia, swinging over to Asia, the most dynamic region in the world. It isn't just a military focus, and I mean that's one of the problems, and I point this out because this is a constant battle that we have in all of our conversations with friends, allies, adversaries, all across the region, that this isn't really intended to be a military-led sort of program. If the rebalance is really intended, first of all, to lead with forward-based diplomacy, to be followed then by business and economic engagement, and only lastly do we take up the military pillar of this project. Unfortunately, it's the military, the hardware, the ships, the planes, the bombs, the 60-40 split of hard assets between the Atlantic and Pacific that gets the attention. But I've had so many conversations with people in Tokyo, in China, in Seoul, Southeast Asia in particular, where they really feel as though they're concerned about this weighting and this incredible emphasis on the military component of it. And I think it's really important that we in the United States explain it is precisely an attempt to engage with the complete store of U.S. national assets, all the little pieces in our toolbox. So, having taken you completely off your game as we start on this,
I think
move on.
But
please.
I think that and I stand corrected. I stand educated. But I think the point that you make is a very, very critical one, because it takes all of those assets to build into and interwoven together to provide a total stability within this dynamic region. And so what we want to examine this afternoon are some of the key areas, not all of them obviously, that are pushing and pulling against stability or potential stability in the region.
Yeah, and frankly, I think as we go through this list that we've been discussing, I think we're going to find that in fact, some of the cases there really isn't a role for U.S. military assets at all, but there is a place for diplomatic and business actors, and consequently, that's why it really requires what's often called a whole of government approach, one that coordinates across the entire range of U.S. bureaucracies and hopefully goes beyond the government and includes both public and private partnerships.
Well, let's do this. Let's use kind of the map of Asia as kind of our outline, and let's start by focusing on if we go to the edge of the Indian Ocean, to Myanmar, Burma. We've seen that country with a series of very dynamic reforms led by the Thein Sein government, and yet Myanmar is got some incredible ethnic turmoil operating there. And how about give our listeners or our viewers, kind of a thumbnail sketch of what's going on in Myanmar in terms of ethnic violence?
Well, it's the country itself is a mosaic of ethnic groups, and it's dozens of them. The Burmese majority, of course, dominates the politics and much of the economics, but there are still, nevertheless, and particularly in regional, spread throughout the country, particular hotbeds of ethnic groups. Hotheads.
There are probably some hotheads.
Probably hotheads as well. Nevertheless, they have a very uneasy relationship with the central government, and for a whole bunch of different reasons, it has to do with the latitude that's given to them for autonomy, for self-expression, for control over resources. I mean, one of the important we don't, I believe, really truly appreciate the significance of the changes that are going on in Myanmar. That it is a huge shift in terms of the, if you will, and I hate to be reduced to this, but this notion of a regional balance of power. That it's a huge country with great wealth, incredibly important, strategically positioned,
right.
And how it lines up, if you will, in terms of who it's working closely with, who it sees as a friend, as a partner, as an adversary, as an ally, could well prove to be dispositive over time to the fundamentals, if you will, of Southeast Asia in terms of its political, economic development.
So what you're saying is that Myanmar, likely in the future, is a key player in the stability of that region.
Yeah, very potentially so.
Okay.
I mean, and certainly a very, very wealthy country, one that has been appallingly mismanaged, one that had extraordinary potential 60 years ago and has largely squandered that.
Okay.
So now we see it re-entering, if you will, the community, certainly of Southeast Asia, and I think the world more generally. And so now the question becomes, will the government of Myanmar stay on the trajectory that it's on, continue its integrative process, its rapprochement with the United States and the rest of the world? And the key from the ethnic difficulties, because again, they're all scattered throughout the country, several dozen of them, and that they have the opportunity to derail. Send the country off of of the political path that it's on, where the government might be forced to crack down against ethnic groups, to send in the military. It certainly has the chance to drive it off its path because of the instability, because of the near wartime environment. Has the ability, mind you, to shift the terms of business engagement, which permits corruption, which permits theft, etc. And it just keeps this from becoming a stable and prosperous country. So the various, if you will, hotbeds. I keep hotheads. I'm thinking of someone. These various hotbeds have the potential, like I said, to I think unravel what is hopefully a very promising trajectory. The two that I would be paying the most attention to at this point are in the north, in the Kachin, where you have again a rebel group that seems to be having great difficulties with the government, and there's disputes over water, there's over various minerals.
That's all on the Chinese border.
Right, and the problem here is that as the unrest grows, that you see both a flood of refugees across the Chinese border into China, as well as some retaliation taken against Chinese businesses. And so you have the potential, if you will, to create a cross-border controversy with China, where they could either, as they have in the past, decide that they don't like the way that their nationals are being treated, that they don't like the way their business interests are being treated, because sometimes they're Chinese businesses, and just don't like the flood of refugees. So they might send a group of a military in, if you will, to straighten things out, to punish, to teach them a lesson, which they did, for example, in 1979 with the Vietnamese. And given the prevailing political environment in Beijing these days, it's hard to say that China would be restrained if given
right.
an affront to national dignity right. that way. There's also some disputes similarly along the border with Thailand, much more long-going, and again, there's a great deal of corruption there, a lot of trafficking and all sorts of bad things. And by the way, illegal drugs, illegal mining are a huge problem in Myanmar. And consequently, the prospect of, if you will, of local militias and warlords on either side of the border deciding that they don't like the new distribution of the spoils might be enough to cause a conflict that, of course, could span. And then finally, over on the Bangladeshi border, there's another problem with disputes between Buddhists and between Muslims, which is a long-standing problem, and one that unfortunately has had horrific human consequences in the concept of tens of thousands of Muslim immigrants that have been forced out of Bangladesh, out of this part of Myanmar, into other parts of Southeast Asia, creating floods of refugees that die at sea, that are put in camps, subject to all sorts of inhumane conditions.
So any one of these flashpoints within Myanmar has the potential of spilling over across the border, or exploding, and the more important point you're saying is exploding to the level that it derails the government's whole process for reform and attracting foreign direct investment, and is kind of like a giant step backwards.
Potentially so. I don't know of anyone that could give me a very coherent or persuasive explanation for what's going on in Myanmar, why they've made the radical changes in policy that they have. And clearly, and mind you, I think they're making the right decisions, and these are important ones. Mm-hmm. But the degree to which they are embedded, that they have been adopted by the majority of politicians and, more importantly, stakeholders, is as yet unclear. So the danger, it seems to me, is that if you create instability within that state, what you have is then create a pretext for an opportunity for disaffected folks, people that have been losing out and stand to lose out more over time as this reform process continues, democratic and both political and economic, that they could see this as an opportunity to, readdress, to reshift, if you will, priorities. Sure. And to reshift the balance of power internally within the country.
Sure. Let's do this, Brad. Let's shift now and move to a different topic after the break.
After the break.
And we'll talk about the South China Sea and kind of where things are going there. Stay with us. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
.760 KGU.
Part of the Wall Street Business Network.
No accidents or stalls are reported. Traffic overall looks typical, and your afternoon commute time should be normal. If you're going east, looks fine to Hawaii Kai, and no problems over to the windward side to Kailua or Kaneohe. If you're going west, the H1 slows at the Eva end of the airport viaduct. The Moanalua slows at Kaiser. If you're coming into town from the west, you'll get into slow traffic at Ola Lane, and from the east, it slows at McCullough.
It makes me look rather retarded.
The words are right over here.
You would be surprised how many people like to watch a radio show.
I would be surprised if anybody likes to watch a radio show. So
it's
that would
amazing.
take your word for that.
Amazing.
You're getting his arm though, but not too bad.
Yeah, you got David's arm.
That's a real close-up.
We can get his pores on his nose,
Should I zoom out a little?
I don't want to obliterate the words. That's all. Are you okay?
Move out a little bit. Yeah, that's good.
Mind you, it's like that.
Yeah.
Good. Shouldn't we be having those little thingies where you have the earbuds and then the little micro things that you see Beyonce singing with on when she's...
It's just not Renaissance. I'm sorry.
Okay, that works for me. I can live with that.
Okay.
Sorry, you were saying?
I lost my train of thought completely here. Yeah.
Still boarding at the station.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, can you hear me? Jay, can you hear me? Would you take my headphones down a bit?
Pacific Forum CSIS is a nonprofit, nonpartisan foreign policy organization affiliated with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. From right here in Honolulu, Pacific Forum has, since 1975, provided analysis on current and emerging political, economic, business, and security issues for leaders throughout the U.S. and Asia. Also, the Pacific Forum Young Leaders Program brings young professionals and next-generation leaders from around the U.S., Asia, and Europe together to observe and participate in high-level, multinational dialogues normally reserved for senior policy experts. To provide your support for the Young Leaders Program and to send future generation leaders abroad to ensure peace and prosperity in the Pacific, please contact Pacific Forum at 808-521-6745. That's 808-521-6745. Or you can visit them on the web at pacforum.org. That's PAC forum.org.
Sorry, hear the commercials.
David Day is an international lawyer with a depth of experience in the business and geopolitical issues of the Asia-Pacific region. David hosts the Tuesday Asia Business and Foreign Policy shows here on ThinkTech Radio. He's another example of the unparalleled media depth that ThinkTech brings to its programs. Come join David Day as he illuminates Hawaii's bridge to Asia with lively discussions and experts that unwind the critical issues and probe for thoughtful solutions. David Day, Asia in Review on ThinkTech Radio.
We are back. We are live. And you can join us by calling area code 808-296-5467. We're talking about flashpoints in the Asia-Pacific region. And our guest today is Mr. Brad Glosserman, the Executive Director of Pacific Forum. If you just tuned in, we just finished an interesting discussion about the potential flashpoints and destabilizing ethnic violence within Myanmar. And so, Brad, let's shift now to the big enchilada in Southeast Asia in terms of dispute potential, and that is the South China Sea. Very quickly, because we probably have many of our listeners or viewers know a little bit about this dispute, but if you could just kind of paint the picture for the audience there, what this dispute is all about.
Well, quite simply, you have the South China Sea, the sea that's south of China, and it's ringed by a bunch of different countries, of which 6 of them have staked out claims to the territory within that particular, semicircle of enclosed maritime space. The claims are important because they're estimated to be a lot. An estimate is important. I don't know of anyone that's confirmed the amount of the resources that are in petroleum and, say, natural gas that are in the region, but it's thought to be a great deal. The protein resources are quite extensive. It's reckoned. I did a study of this a few years ago, and at that time, some 500 million people depended on the protein from the South China Sea.
And that is a very important resource.
Extremely important resource, and one we often forget. And the entire area is dotted with various pieces of rocks and coral and land that some stick out and some do not, and they're claimed by 6 different countries, one of which is China. And consequently, China has tried essentially to stake what is a claim to the entire maritime area as its own, giving it both control of the resources underground and in the water, as well as using it for certain strategic purposes, suggesting that by virtue of it being almost an inland sea, if you would, that it allows it to restrict the passage of planes and ships that might be used to surveil, conduct intelligence, or otherwise threaten China.
Okay. We've seen over the past couple years various scrapes between China and Philippines, China and Vietnam. How about bring our audience up to date? What is the latest scrape or potential for conflict that has arisen in the South China Sea?
Well, interestingly enough, there are several of them that are ongoing, and I mean, we've been watching these scrapes, as you would, watching these countries rub shoulders for nearly 2 decades now, and I mean, the claims, of course, predate that, but we've seen increasing attention to this. The territory and the resources in the region pretty much since the end of the Cold War. I mean, I think there was, a great deal of concern, if you will, about the potential for frictions to get or tensions to get out of control. And the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, I think unleashed some of that. And what we've seen is commensurate with or in parallel with China's own development, that China's become more assertive about staking its claim. Although in the mid-90s it was brushing, if you will, the Vietnamese off of the Paracels and some other territories as well, and other neighbors. But what we've seen most recently has been a sort of a head-to-head between China and the Philippines over Scarborough Shoal, which is a large reef. Primarily, this has been a fishing conflict.
Why is that of concern to the United States or people, the Americans? Why should we worry about that?
We should worry about the region for 2 reasons, and that is that it is an extraordinary sea lane of communication. We call them SLOCs. Okay. And that something like I think over 50% of global sea traffic goes through this region. Mind you, that was global traffic. 90% of South Korean and Japanese oil and energy supplies, much of the raw materials that they both export and import. Critical, and again, the way that the economies of Southeast Asia are integrated is that they tend to manufacture parts in various countries. They then ship them to China where they're assembled. So again, as they move to China, they go through.
So that's the supply chain route.
Yes, exactly. It's right. The supply chains all run through the sea.
Okay.
So you've got that there. Number 2, we need to be worried, of course, because The Philippines is a treaty ally of the United
So
States.
that's the Scarborough Shoal scary part,
Right.
is the treaty, the defense treaty between, or mutual defense treaty between the United States and Philippines. And Philippines, if they get into a serious scrape with China,
there's the danger that we could become involved. We should also be involved, I think, on what political scientists call a normative level, and that is that we want to believe that we live in a world where disputes are resolved peaceably. That it is not merely, might doesn't necessarily make right.
Right.
And the concern that many countries have at this moment is that as China is rising, that it will be using its newfound power and military prowess to readdress what it considers to be historical injustices done to it over the last 150 years. And so what we want to encourage is that when countries disagree, that they will solve and resolve their disputes peaceably, that they will use the rule of law. You as a lawyer, I think, should appreciate that.
No, makes sense.
Yeah, and that it is not a question merely of might making right. And that we would, the United States position is we take no position on the legitimacy of any sovereignty claim. We are not prepared to say that this belongs to this country or that country.
Okay.
What we do say, however, is that we have obligations to certain treaty allies, and disposition of territory comes under those particular treaties because, for example, in the Japanese case, which we'll get to, because of what's called administrative control. The Japanese control those islands today. Consequently, we are prepared to defend Japan's claim to them, not because we believe that Japan is right or wrong, but because Japan currently controls it. And we do not want to see that situation change as a result of brute force. We want to see it resolved peacefully.
All right, let's go back to my question a little bit earlier. What is the most recent potential flare-up that has occurred in the South China Sea?
Funny how we get off track. There are two of them.
But it's interesting to get off track. Go ahead.
Yeah, there are two of them I think that are most interesting these days. Number one is the ongoing dispute with between Vietnam and China. And again, what you've seen lately is an attempt by the Chinese to physically repulse Vietnamese fishermen. And in fact, there have been a couple of incidents where some fishermen were captured, some were killed. Most recently, there was a flare that was shot at a Vietnamese fishing boat, which I believe it started a fire. I don't know if there were any casualties as a result. But so you've had literally, I think you've certainly had some very, very close and dangerous incidents there.
Sure.
Also, more recently, and it's more, I think, of a signaling, and not human lives haven't been brought into jeopardy because of this. But the Chinese have sent a fairly powerful flotilla of a new boat, some hydrofoils, some jets. I don't think a full flotilla, but a complement of ships that it sent down to what I believe is called James Shoal, which is a contested territory with Malaysia.
What's the significance of that in terms of destabilizing?
It's not a smart move. I mean, is what it isn't. I mean, it's in the sense that it's clearly an attempt by, I think, a part of China to flex its muscles, to acquire training capabilities and to follow in training. What the Chinese are always saying is that these are our territories, and consequently, when we send our ships and our vessels and our people to these islands to go by to reestablish or reassert the Chinese presence, that there is nothing abnormal because these belong to us. Unfortunately, these are disputed islands as well, and consequently, essentially what it does is it then puts a burden, if you will, on the other country to respond, to assert its own claim, to keep that
Sure.
status contested.
And Malaysia, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall any Malaysia being really seriously in the fray with China in recent years.
No, and that's what's sort of surprising, quite frankly, and the Chinese behavior makes sense on a number of levels. And I know we're not going to make this a show about China. But what's striking, I think, is every outside observer, a relatively objective outside observer, looks at Chinese behavior and says, they're doing things that just seem to be gratuitously offensive. That is a needless assertion of power that seems that at the same time potentially antagonizes countries. And China could, you get more flies with honey than vinegar, right? So
Right.
I think that the Chinese would find that if they...
It's sort of a ham-handed foreign policy, right?
Yes, and the Chinese have demonstrated a real subtlety over the last couple of decades. And this, in the last few years, what I think most people have been surprised by is just how unsubtle the Chinese have been, and that. I mean, a lot of people say that they're tipping their hand, they're finally showing their hands, but other people would suggest that there's a bunch of other factors that might be driving this. But it's not doing the Chinese any favors. It's not only does it antagonize neighbors, but it raises doubts about Chinese suspicions, about Chinese sincerity, about long-term intentions, and consequently, I think that there's it doesn't help China's status in the region.
And China's approach in the South China Sea is to try to negotiate with these countries all in one group or individually? Individually. And right. why do they do it that way? Why do they want to do it that way?
Because China is big and these other little countries are small, and it's much easier for this big country to outweigh them. We've had in 2002 China and the 10 nations of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, tried, after some previous rounds of friction, developed what they called a declaration on a code of conduct. Now what's interesting is that it wasn't a code of conduct. It was a declaration on a code of conduct. Okay. So in other words, what we're saying is this is where we want to go, and these are the principles we'd like to address, and this is what we sort of want to do, but we're not there yet. And then the idea was that this declaration would lay the foundation for a longer-term negotiation process that would yield a genuine code of conduct.
Okay.
And nothing happened. And China, I think, preferred both a status quo policy, not pushing certainly multilateral negotiations, and trying to push its relations with each of the individual countries to divide and conquer, to prevent ASEAN from taking a position. Because every country, not only are there territorial disputes between China and some Southeast Asian nations, but Southeast Asian nations themselves, as well as the fact that there are countries.
Well, how's this piecemeal approach faring China?
Pretty well.
Okay. Well, we'll have some more on this after the break. Stay with us. This is Pacific Forum's Issues and Insights.
760 KGU.
Part of the Wall Street Business Network.
Nothing unusual about the afternoon commute so far. It's all the usual slow spots. If you're going west, the H1 slows at the airport on-ramp on the viaduct. The Moanalua slows at Moanalua Gardens. The heavy traffic starts letting up as you get to the Ka'ahumanu overpass. Inbound traffic from the west slows at Ola Lane. No problems to Hawaii Kai or to the windward side if you're headed over on the Pali-Like or the H3 freeway.
Okay, where do we want to pick up on the ASEAN piece?
I'm trying to think.
How about if we come back after the break and we talk about, China's strategy is this piecemeal approach, and what are the smaller countries doing to counter this, or how are they trying to handle it?
Okay.
Just raise your hand that David will recognize you.
Yeah, or just stand up.
You should let me know when you guys are ready for yours.
Well, we'll be getting to the Senkakus fairly quickly.
Yeah, and we just give us a couple minutes into the next segment, and then we'll come into Senkakus.
Well, would it make sense to do it after the break, the third one? Come back straight with a question, assuming, why not?
Yeah. I mean, from him?
Mm-hmm. Not this break, the next break.
We could, or I think it's better if he just comes in right in the middle of the discussion, wherever you want, Joe.
Wherever you think it sounds like it fits.
Yeah.
Would you like to hear what I've...
No.
Nah, surprise.
No, it's better. It's better if it's spontaneous.
I'll make things up.
This guy is a total.
Honey, if we had installed solar water heating last year, we would have saved about $600 on our electric bill.
Wow, that's like 40 pounds of poke.
Or 15 bikinis.
Or 800 pounds of rice.
Or 200 pairs of slippers.
Or 750 malasadas.
Well, that's a lot of malasada.
Solar water is the first step towards big energy savings. With Hawaii Energy's limited time rebate, get solar water heating for about $2,000 and reduce your electric bill up to 40%.
That's a lot of malasada.
Visit hawaiienergy.com/solarwater.
We are back. We are live, and you can call us at area code 808-296-5467. This is KGU 760 AM, part of the Wall Street Business Network, and we're talking with Pacific Forum's Executive Director, Mr. Brad Glosserman, about the Asia-Pacific region's potential flashpoints. And Brad, let's kind of continue our discussion on the South China Sea here just a bit. At the break, we were talking a little bit about China's approach in handling these various disputes with the smaller countries. And the point that you raised was that what's happening is that China's preferring, for obvious reasons, to go out, pick these countries off one by one. And the question I want to put to you now is, what are these small countries doing to counter this approach?
Well, a couple of things.
Or are they doing anything?
Well, I mean, you've seen mostly what they're doing is they're reaching out to the United States, which is what's sort of been one of the drivers to go back to the rebalance. I mean, one of the things, while the Obama administration came in with a disposition, I think, to focus on Asia, it's been that tendency has been accelerated and reinforced by the calls from governments in Southeast Asia in particular to engage the United States, for the United States to come in, to be more visible, to do more so that it is a bigger player in the region. So they've been reaching out to us. It culminated in the ASEAN Regional Forum meeting in Hanoi a couple of years ago when Secretary of State Clinton then stood up and said, we're prepared to offer our good offices to mediate between all of these, and the Chinese were absolutely infuriated. And so what's happened then, I think, is that inadvertently jump-started, if you will, the multilateral negotiation process, and now there's talk about moving finally to that code of conduct. But for the most part, the Chinese are still trying, I think, to play divide and conquer, to try to assert their claims as maximally as possible, and at the same time to marginalize and minimize their other countries with adversarial claims.
Let's go to a different topic within the South China Sea, and I want to talk a little bit about military technology. I understand that in the year 2013, Vietnam reportedly is going to take delivery of the first of 6 very sophisticated Kilo-class Russian submarines. And the introduction of high-end submarine technology with one of the players there, what are the ramifications of this, and where do the submarines fit in this whole destabilizing potential?
Well, it's a fascinating question. First of all, I'd be really careful about saying they're very sophisticated. I'm not sure the Russians sell very sophisticated equipment to anyone, and whether the Vietnamese are prepared to absorb those and use them effectively. But let's just say they're probably a quantum leap ahead of where they're going. This has the potential to cause problems on a bunch of different levels. First of all, there is the irritation that it's going to create in Beijing that the Russians would sell technology to the Vietnamese that would probably end up using them or using them to irritate China. The Chinese have long complained that the Russians don't sell them their best equipment either. So that's a perennial, long-standing issue, number one. Number two, if there is perhaps arms race is too strong a word. Some people would say it's an arms stroll, but there's clearly been a modernization and an advancement of military technology.
How about the term vanity race?
That might work. A vanity purchase, at least. But clearly the maritime domain is critical. So what you're seeing is a heavy investment in ships and in submarines. And submarines they're spreading, like dolphins. There's a lot of acquisition of submarine technologies for reasons I do think that are probably driven more by vanity than by any actual need. And the problem is that these are ships that are underwater. There are no rules of the road. They are in a confined space. There's a lot of countries that have them. They're acquiring the technology, the doctrines. There's a real good chance and potential for them to go bumping into each other. And consequently, I think the possibility of an accident is very high, and that could lead to, you can either say something bad happens and it was an accident, or something bad happens and it was on purpose. And if you have the larger set of tensions, then clearly you have the opportunity for bad things to happen. I'm a little concerned, quite frankly, and I think other people are well. The other dimension to this that's worth noting is that you have a very important Chinese strategic submarine base down in the south in Hainan, and consequently, anybody that puts submarines into the South China Sea, the Chinese, I think, are going to look at that very, very warily and say, is this ultimately a threat to our strategic systems? And consequently, how worried are they going to be about their presence and about the potential for undermining their longer-term defense?
Fascinating. Let's move up the map now from the South China Sea to the East China Sea, the islands between Okinawa and the Chinese mainland, called on the Japanese side the Senkakus. Right. And
on the Chinese side, what are they called?
Diaoyu or something like that.
The Diaoyu or the
Diaoyu. Okay, thank you.
We have to get both of those, or we're going to really risk offending one audience.
All right. Well, what's the latest development there?
Well, the Chinese have been ratcheting up attention on to do what they can to ultimately challenge the Japanese claim of administrative control. Let me try to get real quickly, very simple. The islands are claimed by Japan, claimed by China, and claimed by Taiwan. And the islands have been part of Japanese administrative control largely since World War II, the end of World War II, but mostly since Okinawa and Japan was occupied by the United States, with the reversion of Okinawa in 1972 from the United States occupation authorities to Japan. The Senkaku Dayu Islands came with them. So they are considered to be under Japan's administrative control. As such, we go back to our earlier statement, because they are administered by Japan, regardless of who actually owns them, but because the Japanese legally or have the claim to them at this moment, that means they are subject to the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. Very important. So, in other words, if there is a conflict over these islands, the United States is treaty bound to defend Japan, and potentially this could draw us into a conflict with a country that chooses to
Very dangerous situation.
Potentially dangerous. Not very dangerous, but but worrisome. So, the Chinese claim that these islands are theirs, that they have, that no matter what the Japanese may have in terms of their deeds and what have you, that they have long belonged to Japan, that they were stolen in 1896. They should have been reverted to the Japanese at the end of World War II.
Reverted to the Chinese.
Well, I'm sorry, reverted to the Chinese at the end of World War II, and that the Japanese hold them now in illegally, essentially. And there have been a lot of little incidents, and truthfully, the problem is that some people would claim that the current unease began in 2010. Some people will claim it began in 2008. Some people will say it began a few years before that. Some say it began in 1896.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't think we're terribly well served by going backwards. The issue is that in the current state, they're administered by the Japanese. The Chinese have decided, for a variety of reasons, that they wish to challenge the Japanese claim of control. And consequently, what in the Japanese official position is, we refuse to acknowledge that there is a dispute over the islands. Now, in normal everyday language that you and I have, we would say there's a dispute.
Obviously, you want them and I have them.
And I claim them, so it's a dispute. But as you well know, lawyers and other human beings don't speak or talk alike, speak or think alike. And so consequently, the dispute is in fact a legal diplomatic term, and it has to do with, is in fact the Chinese claim to these islands recognized? The Japanese say no. And the Chinese, of course, say yes. What the Chinese have been trying to do over the last couple of years is sufficiently challenge the Japanese claim of administrative control. So they're sending ships out on a very, very regular basis. And mind you, these are fishing boats or any of the number of
these are not military vessels.
No, and that's one of the brilliant things about the Chinese strategy, is that they're not sending the PLA Navy, People's Liberation Army Navy, out to these islands. They're sending out fishermen's vessels. They're sending out naval surveillance, maritime surveillance, fisheries vessels, which are official Chinese government ships, but they're not what we call gray hulls. Right? They can be white hulls or something else. So that it's a way of keeping, if you will, the tensions down and avoiding the escalation of. But what it still does is it puts the Chinese present within the area that is disputed, that is claimed by the Chinese, such that they can then say the Japanese do not in fact exercise administrative control. We have a dispute, therefore now let us negotiate over it.
So the effect of this is by attempting to get in and pry back the Japanese administrative control is to maybe use a bit of a crowbar to get the U.S. off of its treaty obligation. Well, I mean, is that part of the strategy?
There's part of it. I think there's a whole lot of things here at work. And number one, I would urge anybody, there's a resolution group called the International Crisis Group, which creates all these international, which looks at conflicts around the world. They're about to publish a brand new report on this, and I would urge everyone to read it. They were just, their Beijing office director was in town meeting with us and discussing. It's a wonderful report. But I mean, the Chinese have several objectives. One, yes, they want to get the islands. Number two, I think what they want to demonstrate, and they want the islands because it's national territory, it's national pride, it is a show of force, it is a way of redressing historical grievances for 150 years. It is also, I think, a way of asserting Chinese primacy over Japan generally. It is a way of seeing where the tension points are between Japan and the United States, to what degree is the U.S. genuinely committed, to demonstrate that the U.S. commitment perhaps isn't quite so strong, and raise doubts not only among the Japanese, but among other treaty allies and other countries in the region, that the United States may not be the partner that it says and that they want us to be. So it's attempting, if you will, all sorts of means, subtle and not so, to advance Chinese national interests, and at the same time, I think, perhaps to play down try to minimize U.S. influence in the region as well.
We have a caller from our studio audience here. A question coming in. Joe from Honolulu, do you have a question?
Mr. Glosserman, there's obvious animosity between Japan and China due to many factors. We don't have time to get into all of them. But with the recent mass protests in both respected countries, how does nationalism affect the ability to repair the relationship between Japan and China?
It's an absolute constraint. I would say that the nationalism in Japan is actually is nowhere near as visible or certainly as energized as that in China. I mean, there haven't been mass demonstrations in Japan as far as I'm really aware of. There have been some small ones, and usually they're on other subjects. But clearly what it does is it creates a very, very sensitive spot. It forces the government in Beijing to pay attention. It acts, if you will, as a restraint on the ability to compromise, and that's especially dangerous at a time when you have a leadership transition as China's been going through. So what it does is it creates a floor, if you will, and eliminates very many of the rationales and undercuts the forces for compromise.
Chops out the options.
Well, not so much that, because I think the options always exist, but it makes it much harder. You don't usually make a lot of progress in your political career by saying, we have a dispute with a neighbor that we've gone to war with and has done unspeakable things to our country. Let's compromise. Yeah, that's not a real persuasive argument.
We have more, and when we come back after the break, we'll be talking about the issue that's on everybody's mind right now, North Korea. Stay with us.
760 KGU.
Part of the Wall Street Business Network.
There's one accident reported. It's in town on Kapiolani Boulevard at Paani Street. That's just east of McCullough. No slowdown jet heading east to Hawaii Kai. Windward drive is normal. And if you're going west, looks usual. The H1 is stop and go at the airport on-ramp on the viaduct. If you take the Moanalua Freeway, it gets slow in Fort Shafter Flats. The heavy traffic continues on the H1 all the way out to the H1-H2 split.
A few years ago, Richard is the director of the foreign policy, the North Asia program at the Brookings Institution. It's about Japan-China. It's worth looking at. What else? There's a guy by the name of Reinhold Drifte, D-R-I-F-T-E.
Yes, he's written many publications.
Yeah, Drifte. Reinhold's a bit of a pain in the ass, but that's
this studio.
You should refer to him as the studio audience.
Yes.
I think we should start having an audience today. I think we should start inviting people. We can. Yeah, exactly. Start raffling.
Yeah.
We have people cheering us on when we're doing it, like applause.
Gentle applause.
Yeah, exactly. That would be hysterical. Can you imagine? Well, if you'd like to come down and see the program live, why don't you send us a postcard to email ThinkTech Hawaii and say, I want to come.
Do it. Say that. It's perfect. You should also announce this is going out on the internet, on both the video and radio.
Yeah.
And all they got to do is go.
Pacific Forum CSIS is a nonprofit, nonpartisan foreign policy organization affiliated with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. From right here in Honolulu, Pacific Forum has, since 1975, provided analysis on current and emerging political, economic, business, and security issues for leaders throughout the U.S. and Asia. Also, the Pacific Forum Young Leaders Program brings young professionals and next-generation leaders from around the U.S., Asia, and Europe together to observe and participate in high-level, multinational dialogues normally reserved for senior policy experts. To provide your support for the Young Leaders Program and to send future generation leaders abroad to ensure peace and prosperity in the Pacific, please contact Pacific Forum at 808-521-6745. That's 808-521-6745. Or you can visit them on the web at pacforum.org. That's pacforum.org.
We are back. We are live. And you can join the conversation by calling us at area code 808-296-5467. But as you probably heard from the earlier segment, ThinkTech Hawaii now has a live studio audience. And we are broadcasting on the internet. And that's in an audio form and also in a video form, television with two separate streaming channels there. So you can watch this radio show, you can listen to it all on the internet, or you can join our beloved partners at 760KGU. There's no dot there, 760KGU AM.
So you get stereo and stereo, right?
That's
you
right.
Can listen to all the different things. Or you can even come in and see us live.
You could come in and see us live here. You can be in the studio audience. You can participate with the show. And if you'd like to come down and join our studio audience, go onto our website, thinktechhawaii.com. That's thinktechhawaii.com. And send us a postcard and tell us why you'd like to be in.
An email, probably.
We'll take an email, yeah. I guess the postcard doesn't work, right? All right. This is Pacific Forum's Issues and Insights.
And no, we haven't been drinking between the breaks.
And
just water.
Our wonderful, wonderful, one of my favorite guests of all time here is Brad Glosserman, the Executive Director of Pacific Forum. We are having a blast here. We're talking about regional flashpoints within the region. And now, Brad, let's talk about the issue that's on everybody's mind, North Korea. What are we gonna? I guess everybody wants to know: Are we gonna go to war with North Korea? Is there gonna be a conflict? What do you think? There's a good question for you.
Well, the question I got about a week ago was, do we have to? How worried should we be? In the question, and my answer is not. I mean, yes, there is a chance that we could go to war but not, I think, out of deliberate choices. The danger at this point is of miscalculation, of misperceptions, of mistakes. I mean, we're dealing with some great unknowns, and but nevertheless, I think the North Korean leadership, Kim Jong-un, for all his uncertainties, this kid's not dumb. He's been educated and spent more time outside of North Korea than anyone in his family. Grew up in Switzerland or attended school there. He has to have some sense of the realities of basic verities of human politics and power. And so this is someone who knows, and clearly I think the people around him know at least, that if he were to make a gesture to make what we call a kinetic strike, to do something that had physical consequences, that was visible, that we could attribute and trace where it came from, that there would be
with some fingerprints on it.
Fingerprints. There would be very, 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 very negative and powerful consequences.
That's a lot of varies.
It's a lot of varies. But he doesn't want a war. He knows that he will lose a war, and he doesn't. And neither do the Americans, nor do the Chinese, neither do the Japanese or the South Koreans. No one is looking for war. But when you have the incredible, the belligerence, when you have the political pressures in Seoul and in North Korea, both governments being driven by domestic constituencies to be strong, to stand up, to lean forward, and to show no weakness, that there is. And when you have B-2 bombers flying halfway around the world, and F-22s, and very incredibly high-powered military exercises, and paranoia, there is always the possibility of a miscalculation or mistake, and that's what we need to be on guard against.
Well, that's a terrific answer to a question I think that's been on everyone's mind. Let's go to two issues that maybe they're bellicose rhetoric generated issues. One is the announcement of restarting of the Yongbyon nuclear reactor, and the other is the effective partial shutdown of the Kaesong industrial complex just across the border from South Korea. And those two incidents to me look like the creation of new poker chips to play with.
Yes and no. I mean, clearly there's always poker chips. Let's take them
one at a time.
One at a time. Always a good idea. But start with Yongbyon. There are two ways to build a nuclear bomb. You either generate plutonium through certain techniques, and you build a bomb from plutonium, or you use uranium, you enrich it to bomb grade, and then you put it in a bomb. The 6 nuclear weapons, 6 to 8 to 10, whatever the number that's estimated, that North Korea is thought to have or had were generated as a result of the plutonium program that came out of the reactors that were Yongbyon.
Okay.
So when those reactors were shut down in 2007 as part of the six-party talks agreement, when that water tower exploded, as some people know, or was demolished, what that did essentially was cap the plutonium that North Korea could get its hands on. I mean, that it had generated domestically. So at that point, once that factory got shut down, basically all that North Korea was doing every time it tested a weapon was
using up its inventory.
Using up its inventory.
Okay.
So, and you know, some people said, yeah, keep testing, keep going, because it's great.
Test your inventory.
And that's why the accusations in 2002 that it had a secret uranium program were so very difficult. Because, number one, you can make, well, let's say it like this. Number one, actually North Korea has raw uranium. So it can mine the uranium, and then it can create the highly enriched uranium so that by it had the raw material, it could create a much larger and ever-growing stockpile of material, to fissile material. Internal resources.
Okay.
Right. So what's happened is that the charge was that by creating the uranium program, that it had created an alternative route, and there was potentially no cap on the amount of fissile material it could generate. So now, but mind you, a plutonium bomb and a uranium bomb are very different. So there's a question about the last nuclear explosion. There's some news reports recently that it may have been a uranium device, which would suggest that they have
different ballgame.
Different ballgame because they've got enough uranium to make a bomb and they've got the technology to create it.
Wow.
So, and now, if they decide in fact to restart and rebuild the plutonium, then you have two sources, if you will. And so that's what that's important about. And so it becomes a whole new set of headaches in terms of what is regulated, how they're regulated, and it's very difficult to find these uranium enrichment facilities. I mean, Yongbyon we know where it is. We've seen it, you rebuild it, there it is. I mean, you know, worst comes to worst, you know how to take it out. We have no idea where the HEU program is.
Interesting.
So that's problematic. Now, Kaesong. What Kaesong is frankly a bread maker, a money-making venture.
Yeah, doesn't it generate something like $2 billion worth of trade for?
$2 billion, but I think it's closer to a couple of $100 million in revenue for North Korean workers. Okay. And the argument always was that this was a test of the seriousness of North Korean belligerents because they would never kill the goose, right?
Right.
And this is because it employs tens of thousands of North Koreans. It was a constant flow of money that essentially went to the leadership because however much the people are paid that work there, their money really goes to the government. This is actually I think it's the second time that they've shut down Kaesong, but it has always been sort of an article of faith that they would leave it open and not, again, kill that goose. Whereas in this case they finally have done, which suggests that maybe there is something different. The question now is that there are several, I think, 1,000 workers that are still at Kaesong not left.
South Korea. These are South Korean.
South Korean workers. It's mostly North Korean labor, South Korean management, and so people, of course, doing deliveries.
So those, what you're saying is that those South Korean
are potential hostages. Wow. Potential, but we don't know that.
Yeah, I understand.
You know, some of them have left, and there may still be going on. And this is, you know, some of the solace I think that we can take from all of this uncertainty is that the North Koreans are being very deliberate, and they seem to be ratcheting up. But it's in a conscious and it's a stepwise process. It's not great incremental leaks and leaps. And some of the belligerents, the language may be over the top, but the actions themselves don't seem to be so irresponsible. The danger, what we're worried about now, is they talk about moving a missile to the East Coast, or that you know that we've given them carte blanche, that we will, that the language that they use, which is parsed very carefully, is the degree to which there seems to be a shift from a defensive response to an offensive or preemptive response as well. And we're not there yet, but what we are seeing is great deal of concern that you have two very, very powerful, three if you include the United States, countries with incredibly high stakes, very high egos, a lot of pride at issue, with the capacity for things to go wrong very quickly. And it won't take, it's a lot of firepower in a very condensed space.
All it takes is a little mistake.
Yes, and it's unfortunately these are very complex systems that are, you know, as I think the lessons of complex systems, the 2007-2008 financial crisis, is that mistakes happen. Those are to be expected.
Brad, do you see China as trying to cool North Korea down?
Yes and no. China clearly does not want to see a confrontation. It doesn't want to see a clash. It wants stability in this region. And North Korea, there is no love lost between North Korea and China on either side. At the same time, the North Koreans serve very real purposes for China. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, and one of the things that we're going to be talking about in a future show, is the degree to which, as the new government in South Korea seeks to engage North Korea and tries to break out of the deadlock, that the route that it's going to take is going to go through Beijing. And consequently, what you're going to see is Beijing trying to use, if you will, Seoul's attempt to get to Pyongyang and its outreach to Beijing to get to North Korea is going to use that, I think, as a wedge to try to create some daylight between South Korea and the United States as well. It's going to be a very interesting and complicated dance. And we'll pick that up with another show. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion, Brad, and I really appreciate you taking the time to I'll send you a bill. I'll send you a bill at the end of the week. Yeah, please send me a bill, because it's really important that we understand the significance of these potential flashpoints within the Asia-Pacific region and the potential for destabilizing that dynamism in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Pacific Forum's Issues and Insights. Please have a safe drive home. And we'll be back at you next Thursday afternoon, same time, same place. Good night. And don't forget the studio audience. Yeah, don't forget the studio audience. Good night.